Welfare check. On beloved county farmer exposed hidden compound operating for 9 years. Millhaven County sits in the kind of American heartland that people describe when they talk about small-town values. Population, 11,200. One main road cuts through the center of Millhaven itself, flanked by a hardware store that has been in the same family since 1961. A diner where the coffee is strong and the gossip is stronger. A post office, a community church, and the elementary school where nearly every adult in the county once learned to read. The county spreads outward from that center in patchwork quilts of farmland, gravel roads with metal mailboxes at the end of long driveways, and the kind of open sky that makes people from cities stop and take photographs. Neighbors here are separated by fields rather than fences. Everybody waves. Everybody knows everybody's name. That, the locals will tell you, is what makes Millhaven County a good place to raise a family. What the locals did not know, could not have imagined, was that for 9 years, something deeply wrong had been hiding on one of those familiar farms. Something that had operated in plain sight, behind a face that county residents had trusted completely, beneath a reputation that had been built carefully and deliberately over more than a decade and a half. It was a routine welfare check that started everything. On a Tuesday morning in early spring, Deputy Rachel Morales of the Millhaven County Sheriff's Office was dispatched to a property on Route 9, approximately 4 miles east of town. The call had come in through a family member, a sister living out of state, who had been unable to reach her brother for 11 days. She described him as a reliable communicator, a man who called every Sunday without fail. He had missed 3 Sundays in a row. She had tried his cell phone, his landline, his neighbor's phone. She had sent a letter. Nothing. She was worried sick. The address on Deputy Morales' dispatch screen read 4418 Route 9, Millhaven County. The property belonged to a man who had lived and farmed that land for 17 years. Deputy Morales knew the address. She had driven past it hundreds of times. The white farmhouse was visible from the road. Well-maintained, freshly painted every few years, surrounded by a kitchen garden that was clearly tended with care. The barn was large and classic, red with a weather vane on top. The whole property had the look of a place someone loved. In the summer, the corn grew tall along the roadside fence, and people driving Route 9 to the county fair would slow down to admire it. The man who owned that property was known throughout Millhaven County as one of its finest citizens. He had arrived in the county at age 34, a transplant from the Midwest who had purchased the 62-acre farm with cash and a handshake. Within 2 years, he had become a fixture at the Millhaven County Farmers Market, selling sweet corn, tomatoes, pumpkins, winter squash, and the strawberries that won the county fair blue ribbon 4 years running. He supplied 3 local restaurants and the elementary school's lunch program. He sat on the county agricultural board for 8 years. He judged the pie competition at the county fair. He donated turkeys at Thanksgiving and Christmas trees in December. When the community center roof needed replacing, he organized a fundraiser and personally contributed the largest single donation. When the Methodist church flooded, he showed up the next morning with a water pump and 4 volunteers. People in Millhaven County had known this man for 17 years. They had shaken his hand at the diner, waved at him from the road, bought his produce, accepted his donations, sat beside him at county meetings. Their children had eaten his strawberries at school. Some of those children were now in their 20s, and they still thought of him as one of the good ones, one of the best ones. His sister had not heard from him in 11 days. Deputy Morales pulled into the driveway at 9:14 in the morning. The property looked the way it always looked, orderly, maintained, quiet in the early spring before the planting season began in earnest. A tractor was parked beside the barn. A stack of wooden crates sat near the barn's main doors. Nothing out of the ordinary. She knocked at the farmhouse door. No answer. She walked around to the back of the house, calling out as she went. The back door was unlocked. She announced herself, Sheriff's Office, welfare check, and entered. The kitchen was clean and smelled of recent use. A coffee mug on the counter still holding a dried ring from its last use days before. The rest of the house was orderly. The bedroom, bed made. The bathroom, towels folded. No signs of distress. No signs of a medical emergency. No signs of the property's owner. Deputy Morales stepped back outside. The farm appeared empty. A welfare check, she noted, doesn't end at the front door. She crossed the yard toward the barn. The barn's main doors were secured with a padlock, a heavy-gauge combination padlock of the kind used on commercial storage units, not the lighter padlocks most farmers use on equipment buildings. Deputy Morales noted it without alarm. Farmers padlock their equipment. It wasn't remarkable on its own. What was slightly more remarkable were the secondary doors along the barn's eastern wall. 3 of them, spaced roughly 20 feet apart, each secured with the same heavy-gauge padlocks. Commercial grade. 4 of them, total, on a barn that contained farming equipment. She circled the barn slowly. At the barn's far northern end, set back from the main structure and partially concealed by a growth of mature pine trees, was a structure she hadn't noticed from the road. A concrete block building, approximately 30 by 20 feet, low-roofed and windowless. It looked like a utility building, a pump house or equipment storage. The door on its front face was metal, industrial grade, the kind of door you'd find on a commercial walk-in cooler. It had no handle on the outside. It had a keypad and a deadbolt lock. Deputy Morales stood in front of that door for a moment. A keypad entry, handle-free metal door on a windowless building at the back of a farm whose owner hadn't been seen in 11 days. She filed it in the category of things that warranted explanation. She returned to her cruiser and called it in. Within 40 minutes, a second deputy had arrived at the property. Together, they attempted several more times to locate the property's owner, calling into the barn, checking the fields, driving the perimeter of the 62-acre property on the access roads. Nothing. The property was empty of its owner. What happened next followed established protocol precisely. The deputies documented their observations, noted the unusual structures and commercial-grade security measures, and contacted the duty supervisor. The circumstances, missing man, unusual fortifications, unexplained structure, justified further investigation. A warrant application was prepared and submitted. The warrant was granted by the county court at 3:40 that afternoon. By 4:15, 4 deputies and a supervisor were back at 4,418 Route 9. They opened the barn first. The padlocks yielded to bolt cutters. Inside, farm equipment, as expected. Tractor implements, seed storage, tool racks. Nothing unusual on the main floor. A wooden staircase at the barn's interior northern wall led to the upper level. The deputies climbed it. The upper level of the barn had, at some point in the past, been substantially modified. What should have been open storage space had been divided. The outer half, visible from the staircase, contained standard storage, wooden crates, agricultural supplies, spare parts organized on metal shelving. But the interior half was separated by a wall that had been framed in, drywalled, and painted to match the barn's original interior boards. At first glance, you could miss it. You had to look at the space and realize that the barn's floor plan didn't add up, that the upper level, measured from outside, was larger than the space you were standing in. There was a seam in the wall behind one of the tall metal shelving units. The shelving unit swung outward on concealed hinges. What was behind it had been built with patience and specific intent. A corridor, 6 feet wide and 12 feet long, led to 3 separate rooms. Each room was approximately 10 by 12 feet. Each room had been insulated and lined with acoustic foam panels. Each room had a ventilation duct running to the roof, concealed from outside by a custom housing that blended with the barn's roofline, unnoticeable from the road or from ground level. Each room had a cot, a chemical toilet, a small sink connected to the barn's plumbing, and a single ceiling light, controlled from outside the room's locked door. The locks on the doors were commercial-grade deadbolts, the kind that lock from the outside only. Evidence of long-term occupation was present in all 3 rooms. Personal items. Handwriting on the walls in 2 rooms, markings that investigators would later determine were ways of tracking the passage of time. One room contained a child's drawing, preserved between 2 pieces of cardboard. It showed a house with a sun above it. This had been operating for 9 years. The Millhaven County Sheriff's Office stood inside that barn and understood in that moment what kind of investigation they were now part of. The supervisor called for additional units. He called for state investigators. He called for victim advocates. He called for the forensic team based 2 counties over. He called for his department's major crimes coordinator. He made those calls from inside the barn of a man who had donated Christmas trees to Millhaven County for 15 years. The property's owner was not on the premises. A BOLO, be on the lookout, was issued at 5:47 p.m. At 7:23 p.m., he was located at a motel 31 miles from Millhaven, where he had checked in under his own name 2 days earlier. He was taken into custody without incident. He did not make a statement. The investigation that followed was extensive and involved multiple law enforcement agencies. What it established, the full scope of what had occurred on that 62-acre property over 9 years, became one of the most significant law enforcement discoveries in the county's history. Between 7 and 9 victims had been held in the barn compound at various times over a 9-year period. Investigators determined from the physical evidence, documentation recovered from the property, and subsequent victim identification efforts. The 3-room structure in the upper barn had not been built all at once. Investigators traced its construction through permit records, material receipts found on the property, and structural analysis. The first concealed room had been completed approximately 9 years earlier. The second had been added 4 years after that. The third was more recent. The ventilation system, the acoustic insulation, the plumbing connections, all of it had been installed incrementally, piece by piece, in a working farm building that was otherwise entirely unremarkable. The construction had been done by the property owner himself, investigators determined, using skills he had developed before purchasing the farm. He had told neighbors, on the occasions when anyone had asked about work being done in the barn, that he was adding cold storage for produce. Nobody had questioned it. Why would they? He was known. He was trusted. He had been part of this community for 17 years. He brought turkeys at Thanksgiving. The community of Millhaven found out over the course of several days, as news broke gradually and then all at once. The sheriff's office, working with county communications staff, released an initial statement confirming that an investigation was underway at a property on Route 9 and that an individual had been taken into custody. By the second day, the address was known. By the third day, the name. The reaction in Millhaven County was unlike anything most residents had experienced. The diner on Main Street, which opened at 6 every morning and served as the community's informal gathering place, was crowded at every hour. People came not just to eat, but to sit near other people, to process what they were hearing, and to do it in the presence of their neighbors. The conversations were fragmented. Nobody quite knew what to say. Many people had known the man arrested for more than a decade. They had stood in line at his market table and paid him $3 for a pint of strawberries. They had voted for him to stay on the agricultural board. They had accepted his donations. The elementary school, 4 miles from the property on Route 9, sent a letter home to parents that week. The school counselor made herself available for students in the upper grades. The letter did not detail the investigation. It simply noted that if children had questions or seemed distressed by news they had heard, additional support was available. The children of Millhaven had eaten produce from that farm through the school's lunch program for years. Families who had visited the county farmers market, and in Millhaven County, that was most families, found themselves thinking about the years of Saturday mornings they had spent at his table. The man's smile, his handshake, the way he remembered people's names, remembered their preferences, asked about their kids. A man whose entire public presence had been, for 17 years, a performance. Several community members came forward in the days following the arrest to speak with investigators, not because they had seen anything suspicious, but because they wanted to try to understand if they had missed something. The answer, in nearly every case, was the same. They had seen nothing. He had been careful. He had been present in the community in the right ways at the right times, and had given people no reason to look closer. He had been, by every outward measure, exactly what he appeared to be. That was the part that settled hardest on Millhaven County. Not just that something terrible had been happening 4 miles east of town, but that the person responsible for it had been welcomed and trusted and genuinely liked by the people who lived there. That they had given him their confidence freely over years, and he had used that confidence as a form of camouflage. He had understood at some level that a man known for his strawberries and his charitable donations would not be scrutinized. That community trust, once established, provided its own protection. He had been right about that. For 9 years, he had been right about that. What he had not calculated for was a welfare check from a sister who called every Sunday. The work of the Millhaven County Sheriff's Office in the days following the initial discovery was methodical and professional. Deputies worked extended shifts. Investigators from the State Criminal Division took over the primary case. Victim advocates were on site throughout the process. The forensic team completed their work in the barn over 4 days. Evidence was cataloged, documented, and preserved according to protocol. Investigators worked outward from the physical evidence to identify victims and establish the full timeline of the operation. The Sheriff's Office coordinated with mental health services to ensure that victim support resources were available not just for those directly affected, but for community members processing their own responses to the discovery. A community information session was held at the County Community Center, the same building whose roof the man in custody had helped repair, where the sheriff, the county attorney, and mental health professionals addressed residents' questions and concerns. More than 300 people attended. The sheriff, speaking at that meeting, said something that stayed with people. He said that the deputies who responded to that welfare check had done exactly what they were trained to do. They had responded to a family's concern. They had looked carefully at what they found. They had followed the details that didn't quite add up. They had done their jobs. And because they had done their jobs, a 9-year operation had ended. He said that this was the work that happens in every county, in every small town, every day. The routine calls, the careful observations, the instincts that get followed up. He said that most welfare checks ended with a phone call to a worried family member saying everything was fine. Most property checks turned up nothing more than an unlocked gate or a minor code violation. But training didn't exist for the routine cases. Training existed for the cases where the ordinary call revealed something that had been hiding for years. The man arrested at that motel 31 miles from Millhaven was charged with multiple serious felony counts. The case proceeded through the legal system over the following years. The investigation, conducted jointly by the Millhaven County Sheriff's Office and state investigators, was characterized by county officials as thorough, professional, and victim-centered throughout. Millhaven County did not forget what had happened. Communities rarely do when betrayal of this scale occurs. But what the county had was something that not every community gets in the aftermath of a discovery like this. A clear answer to the question of how it ended. Not a tip, not an accident, not a coincidence, a welfare check, a deputy's training, a detail that didn't fit, a warrant properly obtained, a professional response. The barn at 4418 Route 9 was demolished 18 months after the arrest. The property sat empty while legal proceedings continued. The farmers market, which had continued operating through the investigation, placed a new vendor at the spot where the man's table had been every Saturday for 15 years. People still came. The strawberries at the new vendor's table were not as good, some people said, though after a while those who said it stopped saying it because it felt strange to miss them. The elementary school continued the school garden program. It had started with funds donated partly by the man now in custody. The program's name was quietly changed. The students who tended the garden were too young to know why. Families in Millhaven County did not stop going to the farmers market. They did not stop buying produce from local farms. They did not stop trusting their neighbors. But they carried with them, going forward, the understanding that trust of the kind Millhaven had extended for 17 years was a thing that could be taken advantage of by someone patient enough and calculating enough to know how to build it. And they carried, alongside that, the knowledge that the system had worked. That a sister who called Sunday had called someone when the calls stopped being answered. That the sheriff's office had taken her concerns seriously. That deputies had done their jobs carefully. That an investigation had been conducted properly. That what had been hidden for 9 years was no longer hidden. In Millhaven County, families still drive Route 9 on their way to the fair in late summer. The corn grows tall along the roadside fence. People slow down sometimes on that stretch. though they don't always say why. They know why, and they know now that someone is watching. Sheriff Patrol covers the stories of county deputies across the country, responding to routine calls that become anything but routine. It is that professional training, the welfare check followed up, the warrant properly obtained, the detail that didn't add up, that stops operations like the one on Route 9 from continuing. Subscribe to Sheriff Patrol for more stories from the communities where trained deputies responded to ordinary calls and found extraordinary threats hiding behind the faces of trusted neighbors. This is a fictional dramatization inspired by law enforcement concepts. No real cases, individuals, or specific locations are depicted.